Is oh, there it is.
Here we are.
Welcome.
Eyes on Oregon. Is this episode 8, John?
This is episode 8.
Welcome, everybody.
Yeah, we are so honored to have everyone here today, particularly our guests. We have with us in attendance Dr. Pilar Hernandez-Wolf, who is a psychologist and a professor of psychology at Lewis and Clark School, which is my alma mater, actually, where I got my law degree. Dr. Hernandez-Wolf teaches there. We have also with us Jyoti Ma. Jyoti Ma is a yogi and a classically trained yogi and the founder of the Temple of Consciousness in Ashland, Oregon. And she's been operating her organization, her spiritual organization, for I believe over 25 years now. And I'm sure we'll hear more about that. And we also have with us Jonathan Goldman, the Padrino of the Santo Daime chapter that practices in Ashland, also the Church of the Holy Light of the Queen. And Jonathan was also a plaintiff in the 2008 lawsuit, Church of the Holy Light of the Queen versus Mukasey, in which the Santo Daime Church successfully sued the federal government for the right to use daime, which some people refer to as ayahuasca, in its religious ceremony. And their community has been practicing in Oregon for I believe around 25 years, but I'm sure he'll hear more about that as well. And so just want to, so the purpose of today's conversation, there's several of them. This is a really exciting time in Oregon for religious practice that involving the use of psychedelics or entheogens, in part because we have two potential votes this upcoming week at the Oregon Psilocybin Advisory Board subcommittees. On Wednesday, March 2nd, from 3 to 5 Pacific, the Equity Subcommittee has on its agenda consideration of requirements for entheogenic psilocybin production and entheogenic psilocybin services under the Oregon Psilocybin Services Act, discussion and possible vote on recommendations. The very next day, Thursday, March 3rd, from 4 to 6 Pacific, we have on the agenda discussion and votes on licensing and spiritual and religious use of psilocybin. So these are topics that haven't been largely addressed at the advisory board or its committees. There's been some discussion, mostly beginning early last month. And given the short timeline that the subcommittees have to make recommendations on these issues, I think there's kind of a last minute push here to try to make sure that the opportunity doesn't pass us by to protect sacred practice without addressing the issue and coming up with a kind of a game plan. So I will throw the link to that meeting in the chat, in the show notes here. So if people want to come and either observe or participate through public comment, there will be a way to do that. For those who aren't familiar with the Oregon Psilocybin Advisory Board process, usually 15 minutes is reserved at the end of each meeting for public comment. And the comments that I hear frequently from the board members are that they really appreciate hearing from the public because it really helps to understand kind of the issues that are important to folks. And there is a lot of expertise that is not, housed in the board or its committees. So they really do look to the public for guidance and expertise on various matters. And I believe that's particularly true with respect to a religious and entheogenic practice. So I want to invite everyone here in attendance today to attend those meetings, comment if you feel called or led to do so, and just voice your support. I think it's important that Oregon hears from us. And so that's what's coming up this week. And so for tonight, we're honored to have with us kind of a panel of religious practitioners who and others who are interested in kind of the religious use of psychedelics. And the hope here is that in advance of these votes, these can be somewhat complicated and topics, particularly with how to do this in a regulatory framework as opposed to kind of a case law framework, which is how religious use of psychedelics have been determined in the past, was through litigation and sometimes statute. It's never, to my knowledge, been done through a regulatory process. So Oregon's question here is somewhat novel. And so my thinking in planning this roundtable here was that these issues are really complex, and that in order for the board and its subcommittees to make nuanced and informed recommendations, we just want to create some space and opportunity to just kind of advance and further the discussion around entheogenic practice and why it's important and how it could look and be regulated under Oregon's program. So that's the first part of it. And then I want to also acknowledge that this conversation today is at least in part a continuation of my presentation to the licensing subcommittee on February 3rd. I ran out of time during that presentation. It was primarily addressed to the question of why Oregon needs to promote or at least protect sacred practice under Measure 109. But we ran out of time and didn't get into the details so much of how. So we will talk a little bit today. The agenda for today is basically kind of a quick overview of the proposed regulatory framework for protecting sacred practice. And then we're going to open it up to the panel, the roundtable panel here, for folks to kind of describe some aspects of their practice that may be informative to Oregon decision makers and others about just what entheogenic practice really is and why it's not something that we need to be necessarily afraid of, and why it's something that Oregon really ought to invite into its program here. So essentially, so I'll get kind of a quick overview of the particulars of the proposed framework for religious practice, and we'll open it up. And then we'll open it to a big question and answer near the end, probably at least a half hour, so that people, particularly with a special invitation to people who are in attendance today, who sit on rulemaking committees, that they can inquire and ask and really kind of wrestle with these questions in an open and frank way. So that's kind of the hope for tonight's event. So we will start with kind of the overview. So essentially, the proposal for entheogenic practitioner privileges and duties is an attempt to carve out the regulations that would provide the broadest maximum protection that would be available under Measure 109 for entheogenic practitioners. I think of Oregon Measure 109 as currently undergoing a reputational makeover. It was kind of sold to voters as psilocybin therapy, but there's nothing in the bill that actually would have it be therapy. And as this represents a sort of new healing modality, psychedelic healing modality that is largely spiritual in nature, the question is, what is the appropriate container, or containers plural, for that healing to be offered through? And spiritual community and religious community is the container that psychedelics have historically and traditionally been offered through community ritual and ceremony. And in a way, it only makes sense for Oregon to adopt that into its rulemaking, particularly where we expect lots of other states to follow suit in looking for the model. So the particulars of the proposal are several that I want to highlight, and this is intended to be a broad overview of it, and it is fairly complex and fairly lengthy. So if anybody has questions, please raise them as this goes on. But essentially, there's several.
Let's also give our guests, if there's any interest and comment before John goes into details, feel free to jump in, and we can get back to that as well. We've got a few other folks joining us shortly as guests as well. So open invitation if there's anything to comment on so far, or we can have John dig into the details.
Yeah, and if you were scheduled to be a guest speaker and we've missed adding you into the panel, please, by all means, let us know. Oh, it looks like Hunt Priest is here now. Hunt Priest is an Episcopalian minister out of the Georgia area, and he's been doing some really interesting work in this space too. And it looks like we also have Nyanga joining us, who is part of an organization that is an entheogenic community, an interfaith, interdisciplinary community in Portland that uses magic mushrooms as its sacrament, as I believe how they refer to them. So thank you for being here with us. So the brief overview of the proposal is that it identifies several ways, several common aspects of religious practice that are used regularly by entheogenic communities, religious communities that use entheogens or psychedelics as either a religious sacrament or an adjunct to their sacred practice of the religious practice, to try to just provide additional flexibility so that they can conduct ceremonies and rituals and to do kind of their, practice their religion without undue and unnecessary interference from the Oregon government. So those aspects that have been identified are centered largely around products as well as service centers and peer support. So one of the key features of Measure 109 is that it has to happen on-site at a licensed facility. It can't be taken off-site, it has to be purchased and consumed and experienced at the facility. A person's not typically allowed to leave the site with it. That's written into the measure, and it's not really something that can be negotiated around, no matter how favorable Oregon rulemakers might be to entheogenic practice. Their hands are tied by the statute. So there are certain things like that that are hardwired into the measure. I call those the non-negotiables, because even if we had a very sympathetic set of rulemakers, there are certain things they can't do no matter what, unless we as Oregonians go back and either get another ballot initiative passed or another piece of legislation that amends the measure. These are the kind of firm parameters that we can't really work around. We have to work within. So one of those is that there has to be a facilitator present during all times that psilocybin is being taken. And the facilitator is not allowed to take psilocybin while serving as a facilitator. So the issue then is what does the facilitator do and how many facilitators must be present? It's anticipated that the general rules that will apply to most service centers and facilitators will require a fixed ratio of facilitators to clients. And that is expected to be one of the major price considerations for the entire measure. But the idea behind the proposal with respect to facilitators is that we want to allow spiritual and religious communities to self-regulate and to certify people within their own community to be able to work in a peer support, including harm reduction role, but not necessarily just limited to that, who are members of the community and are potentially on psilocybin during the experience, or take psilocybin during the experience. So instead of having to have a fixed number of facilitators who are being paid, probably at least $40 an hour would be my guess. Is a guess I've heard. To have a high number of those where a community is well established, it's responsible, it's already its members are able to look out for one another. So we want to just give communities maximum flexibility with kind of providing their own peer support during ceremony. So there, by statute, must be at least one facilitator who's present. So the proposal would say we give entheogenic communities a number of factors that they should consider when determining how many facilitators to have, and assuming that they consider each of these factors, they're allowed to deviate from the ordinarily applicable facilitator to client ratio. So the factors that are in the proposal, it's the familiarity of the service center and the facilitators with the clients who are participating in the ceremony. It's the types of ceremonial activities that the groups intend to engage in. So there's some that could be riskier than others, so to speak. It's the group and its members' prior experience with psilocybin or other psychedelics that could also be a relevant consideration. The amount of cohesion or discord present within the group, if known to the facilitator or service center operator. The relevant experience of the clients who are providing peer support. So if if they're brand new to peer support, they may want to have, and there's not very many who are highly experienced in peer support roles. They may want to potentially have other facilitators around to help kind of fill in some of that space. Any other risk factors that are known or should be known to the operator or the facilitator. So it's kind of intended as a catch-all that they can deviate from the mandatory ratio or the generally applicable ratio within the parameters of the measure, provided that they think of the issues that could, the intent here is to basically require that before a decision gets made about how many facilitators are present, that the community really kind of consider those issues carefully and really do it and exercise that privilege responsibly. And assuming that they're done responsibly and that there's no sort of situational contraindications to reduce that facilitator ratio down to the bare minimum, it would be just that they'd be allowed to do that and have more autonomy over that aspect. So I saw Jonathan Goldman had his hand up. So yeah, Jonathan.
I just wanted to clarify something. It is in the measure that was voted that people facilitating psilocybin things cannot take the medicine. Is that true? That's in the law.
Yeah, that is.
That's not just something that the advisory board decided on. That actually is what people voted on. Is that true?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. So that's what one of the non-negotiables. So there has to be at least one. And so the proposal says if the community can safely and responsibly do so, that they be allowed to have only one facilitator who's there and present, and that they be able to handle the rest of the peer support in-house. So I guess before moving on to other aspects of that, maybe we ought to open it to kind of the panel here and see if folks had kind of thoughts or kind of, as you think about facilitator to client ratios and ability of a community to keep its members safe during ritual or ceremony, kind of what issues come up for you all, and and I guess if Oregon, the rule makers in Oregon are listening to this, what would you want them to consider when drafting rules around this issue? Yeah, Jody.
Yeah, I would just say thank you so much, John, and it's really nice to meet everyone else here on the panel, and good evening to all of our guests, and happy Mahashivaratri to all yogis, yoginis, and practitioners of the Sanatana Dharma. There are 9 Hindu temples in Portland alone, and so tonight is a very special night for those practitioners. I think it's important to recognize the experience and skills of these ethnogenic practitioners who've been practicing for a long time. In our case, as you mentioned, our temple, Enlightened Life Temple, is 28 years this year. We're celebrating. It is a temple of consciousness. Most of these traditions have to do with consciousness. It's not strictly religious or science. I really believe consciousness is the intersection of spirituality and science. For myself, I study a lot of the neuroscience of psilocybin. So I would like that recognition certainly to be there. If you're talking about giving a set of practitioners privileges, then I wonder, how does that relate to the idea of grandparenting people into the system? It seems rather, I've had some strong feedback on the training rules that they've created, the training program, and it's pretty much a medical clinical model and pretty much designed for psychotherapists, basically. And, I've commented many times, I don't think it's broad enough. We need to encompass indigenous practice. We need to encompass entheogenic practice, religious, spiritual use. So this initiative is very, very important. And I do think that it is more equitable to recognize the experience of the entheogenic practitioners by offering grandparenting, as well as, some people may need the training. Maybe they're new to the whole entheogenic community and they need to get some kind of training. That'd be a great resource going forward. But for the people that are already practicing now, the tide is turning. Research came out last week from the Beckley Foundation highlighting that the mystical experience that happens during psilocybin administration is in fact the key to alleviating depression. It relieves depression. If people don't have that strength of mystical experience with psilocybin, then they have a weaker response in terms of recovering from their depression. So they were suggesting, the Beckley Foundation, in their recommendations following that piece of the study or analysis of that piece of the study, that they would be needing to look to spiritual leaders to bring them into psychiatry, to help them understand a spiritual framework, to help them learn how to enhance the mystical side, which for us, that's really all it is. And that's the thing that is healing. And I'm glad their studies are proving that we've been right all these years. And so for us to have some role to play, in providing that set and setting, when teaching that set and setting to the clinicians. The point was made in one of the entheogenic practitioner council meetings that psychotherapists, clinicians, counselors, and all of that have been practicing with psilocybin in research and with other kinds of things like ketamine and the MDMA trials and all of that. But they've been doing that about anywhere from 5 to 10 years. And the entheogenic practitioners just on this call alone, on this podcast alone, have, probably near to 100 years of experience. And so it makes sense to me. We're not experimenting, we're done. They're experimenting. They want to see how it works. They're finding out more every day. They're doing the research that's proving what we've been holding and knowing all these years. So I really believe grandparenting is something that needs to be looked at, not just for us, but for even the indigenous practitioners who want to come to Oregon, who want to have the opportunity to bring their culture. So many Americans are going to Central America and Mexico and South America and for these experiences. And many of those traditional practitioners would like to come here. And I think it's inappropriate for them to be required to take clinical training that doesn't apply to how they work or what they're doing. On the other hand, we have what turns out to be one of the magic ingredients of the success of the clinical studies. And I think it's a very timely conversation. I don't personally think that it's necessary. I mean, I like your proposal on should a peer support person take the psilocybin with the group and sort of be the facilitator who's able to move in that altered state of consciousness and guide from that altered state of consciousness, which many traditions do. And then to have a non-sacrament taking facilitator outside of the circle, but nearby and monitoring, that makes sense to me. It seems reasonable all around. It doesn't interfere with the group experience and the ability of one member of the group at least to have the skills and the spiritual development to be able to do that part of the journey with the group, and for someone else to be there just as a safety mechanism and to meet the requirements. I kind of like the way you wrote that piece, and I think it's doable. I don't want to speak for everyone, but for our rituals and ceremonies, it wouldn't be a big problem, because a lot of times what the facilitators or priests and priestesses do not partake, but they only give it to the the congregation. So, and then they support them. So very similar to what's being imagined for the system here. I like that piece of it. There's a few other places I might, comment again later, but I'd like to hear what everyone else thinks on that peer support idea or the whole proposal in general. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Jody. And I don't necessarily assume that everybody who's on this panel has read the proposal in the same depth that you may have. So we want to invite people to kind of comment if they haven't read the proposal and aren't as familiar with the kind of minutia of it, that they still be invited to speak to the issue of kind of an entheogenic community's ability to self-regulate safely. I think of what the concern from Oregon rulemakers is primarily throughout the whole rulemaking process, they're trying to weigh between safety on the one hand and then accessibility and affordability on the other. And I think the concern is that if they make this kind of more affordable, that's going to be less safe and people are going to get hurt, and that's going to be really bad. So I think as a community of entheogenic practitioners, I think probably there's a lot of experience and wisdom in this room to speak of how equipped and capable a sincere entheogenic community is to handle its own safety issues and to look after the well-being of its congregants, or the community members. So if somebody wanted to had any thoughts on that.
I have a comment to share. Hi everyone, and thanks for the invitation. I'm glad we're doing this. I just want to start with saying that to me, there's a different set of rules and a point of departure when thinking about working with entheogens religiously, spiritually, and in an indigenous way compared to how it's done in the West in a clinical, sometimes very medical manner. And the rules are different, the logic is different. So trying to fit spiritual, religious, indigenous practice into the mold of the clinical medical Western model is very problematic, and it's not a good fit. When thinking about what happens, for example, in indigenous communities, the people who administer the medicine take the medicine. They take the medicine because it's a shared experience, because the helpers and the people, the person who gives the medicine, are very experienced doing this and are experienced in navigating the realms that people access with entheogens. So there is a reason for that. So it's actually not to be out of control. Let's say control is not the right word, but it's not to be out of control. It's actually to be more in control, because you are in tune with what's going on and you have the knowledge and experience to navigate what's going on. You create, let's say, an energetic container with everybody who is there. When that's not there, it creates a different kind of relationship, and it creates a different kind of mystical or healing experience. It's something else. So to me, I believe that the rules for churches and spiritual practitioners should be different, because they should respond to the different logic and the different worldview that is embodied in these practices. So, yeah, leaders should be allowed to have the sacrament. And yeah, perhaps, I mean, I would be okay with having helpers who are not to be around and to help with anything, if necessary. Like I've never seen that that's a need, but that would be okay. But it would not be, it's not the same if a religious or spiritual leader is not able to partake on the sacrament to generate that container with everybody.
Thank you, Pilar. Yeah, go ahead, Jonathan.
I want to follow up on what both Jyoti and Pilar said. This is my framework for this. The medical model and the Western model is an intoxication model, right? People are being intoxicated, and therefore they have to be guarded because something bad can happen when people get intoxicated, right? So somebody has to be there to what? Call 911 or administer, resuscitation. I don't know. We've been doing this here for 29 years. I did a rough calculation, which is not accurate. We've done at least 1,500 ceremonies. Of those 1,500 ceremonies, I've led well over 1,000 of them, my wife and I. In every one of those ceremonies, I have taken the medicine, not microdosing. We have never had anyone have to call 911 or be resuscitated or flipped out or jumped off a cliff or whatever it is that the intoxication model would have to guard against. Because the actual model is an alteration model, not an intoxication model, right? We are altered, but we are altered, as Pilar is saying, everybody is in that same space. And it's not just a space that is created by the medicine. It is a space that opens through the medicine. If you've never participated and you have no idea what I'm talking about, right? But we enter a common space that, as Pilar is saying, has its own ethic, its own rules, its own morality, its own perspective. You see? So if the law is that someone has to sit in another room watching Netflix while everybody else is in the ceremony, okay, it's ridiculous, but okay. And if it's going to make the people who are making the rules feel better, but the reality is that person is going to have nothing to do and shouldn't have anything to do, because look, in those, I'm making it up again, those 1,500 ceremonies, many people have gone through what we call in the Daime passages. And I'm sure everybody who has facilitated anything, people go through passages. You confront very, very deep material in yourself, in your family line, in the general energetic field of the earth. People who are sensitive go through very, very deep processes that from the intoxication model can look like they're flipping out, can look like they've taken too much of whatever it is and they're in trouble. But within the alteration model, we call it a navigation. That's the word it's in Portuguese, navegar. You move through the space confronting that material, which is the transformative material that a person then ends up in their transformation and in the realization of the disidentification with it. They reach a different state of consciousness that then it gets translated, can get translated afterwards as, well, their addiction was healed, their illness got better, blah, blah, blah. See? So I want to just give that window for everybody to look through. So the people who are making the rules, if you have to, by the law, have a certain thing, have a certain arrangement, what I would want is for us to join in the understanding that at least in this space of the spiritual transformative, as Jyoti was saying, the state of consciousness, right? There are, as Pilar is saying, it's a different window. So let's then navigate from that window, right? The only other thing that I'll say is about training, right? I can only speak for how we do it. People spend years in training as to how to help everybody taking the medicine, everybody in every Daime work, and there have been tens and tens of thousands, right? The Daime started in 1930, the same time that the Peyote Church started in the United States. in the tens of thousands of ceremonies, everybody takes the medicine. It's and it's not just a convenience, it's the rule. If anybody comes to a daime ceremony, by definition, they're going to enter into that state of consciousness, into that space, so that there is a unity of heart and a unity of intention and a unity of vibration, which is what allows the miracles to happen, which is what allows the realizations and the healings and the transformations to happen. You see what I mean? So it's a of course, I know you all know what I'm talking about, that there's a multi-layered happening, that a person who by definition is not supposed to be in that, they're going to have nothing to do. What are they're going to, right? But if it needs to be, it needs to be. But that shouldn't be the way that the thing is organized, right? That's an adjunct. Okay, we're going to do that, but let's create the agreement, not even the rules. Okay, the rules, but let's create an agreement that matches the reality of what that circle is, matches the reality of what these medicines really are for, right? Peyote, psilocybin, ayahuasca, who are cousins of each other. They're all cousins. Were not initially put on earth to help, the people of United States pay $5,000 for a session to cure their depression. That's not why those medicines were put on earth, right? One of the leaders of the daime, Padre Sebastião, said, when God put us on earth, she knew that it was going to be hard to be a human being. And so she gave us these plants to help us navigate through how difficult it was going to be being a human being. And he said, wouldn't we be foolish not to take advantage of them? So that's what I want to say. Thank you for listening. Amen.
Thank you, Jonathan. Wow. That touches on one of the concerns I've heard raised about the proposal so far, as I've been kind of discussing it and kind of promoting it. I've heard people say that this is, why would you try to bootstrap a religious freedom program into a medical program? And I think it's just about educating folks about what Measure 109 really is. It's not, I don't think I've ever heard anybody who knows Measure 109 very well refer to it as a medical program. It's really not even a therapeutic program in the sense of its psychotherapy. Measure 109 is a flexible framework that will allow, by its terms, conceivably a wide variety of different types of practice under the measure, including psychotherapy, including wellness spas, and also including entheogenic practice and religious community. I'd like to turn now to, I guess, Hunt Priest is with us, and Hunt is kind of on to my thinking, at the front lines of some really exciting work at the intersectionality of Christianity with psychedelics. And I kind of wonder, from your perspective, Reverend, where do you see how do you see Christianity interfacing or finding expression under Measure 109?
Oh, thanks, John. Thanks for having me. So I do live in Savannah, Georgia, but I lived in Seattle for 8 years and served the church there, an Episcopal church on Mercer Island. And when I lived there, I was allowed to be in a research study of religious professionals and psilocybin. And it was a clinical study, but in the midst of that study, I had two profound religious, sacramental Christian experiences. One of the Holy Spirit present in my body, healing me. And then the second one was sort of a deepening of my ordination at the feet of the universe was how I came to understand it. So I do have Northwest connections, although I don't sound like it, and I currently live in Savannah, Georgia. So it's really an honor to be here. Oregon is a wonderful place. Spent a lot of wonderful time in Oregon on vacation and other times. So all that to say, thank you for allowing me to be here as an interloper of sorts. And I am in a unique position, I guess. I left parish ministry about a year ago to start a nonprofit called Ligare, which is Latin for ligament or to bind. It's also the root word of religion, to bind the human and the divine, which is at its core, I think, what religion is. We've wandered from that, but I think at the core of religious practice is to bind human beings to the divine. I think that's a bit of what Jonathan's speaking about too, I think. So I think all the world's religious traditions have much to offer. The mystical and contemplative parts of the world's religious traditions, not the doctrine, not the rule-based part, but the contemplative and religious side of all the world's religious and spiritual traditions. Christianity has that, and I think that was what prepared me for a very big experience in the clinical study, was my own meditation practice, my own weekly attendance at Eucharist, my chanting, my reading of scripture, my service in the community. All the things that I think the contemplative tradition brings allowed me to have a very profound experience of this holy and a healing from pretty serious anxiety, which I was not as aware of until it was gone. So I think for Christians, let me speak to that because that's my language and my people. I think for us, we have to take seriously the healing modality of entheogens. The church has always cared about healing from the very beginning of Jesus's ministry as a healer up through building hospitals and training doctors. The healing ministry of the church has been important. And I think for us in mental health, end of life transition, addiction, we have to take it seriously. We will take it seriously. So that's one part of this. And so I think educating Christians about that so that there's no resistance or lower resistance, because like all of us, we've been told for 50 years that these sacred plants are dangerous and addictive and deadly. So we're undoing a lot in the Christian community. I want to be a part of that. And then I think also end of life transition. I think that's a pretty easy idea for even very traditional people to take, to understand that these plants and compounds make the end of life transition much easier. And then I think ultimately religious people having access so that we can deepen our own experience of God, have a mystical experience. Religion, if we're not taking mystical experiences seriously, then we really should shut our doors. And I think these sacred plants occasion mystical experiences. It's the mystical experiences that bring about the healing. And the world's religious traditions, all of them, have a lot to say about mystical experiences and about these non-ordinary states of consciousness. Christian and Jewish scripture are full of them. And I think all of scripture is an attempt to explain mystical experiences, actually. So the resurrection appearances of Jesus, stories in the Old Testament, all of it, an attempt to explain mystical experiences. So Christianity and Judaism and Islam and Buddhism and Hinduism and all the other traditions, we have a story, we have experiences of mystical experiences, we have sacred containers, and I think all that we bring to this can help those who are interested in that make sense of the experiences they would have while using these sacred plants. So that was a lot, but I think ultimately what we bring, what the world's religious traditions bring, is this ancient understanding of mystical experiences, attempt to explain them. And I think what entheogens bring to the world's religious traditions is a reliable opportunity to have an experience of God, to occasion a mystical experience. So we're all learning. And I think this isn't new to Christianity. It feels like for a lot of people it is. I mean, in the 20th century, there have been several documented studies and experiences of Christians working with these sacred plants. And then in the ancient Near East and in Greece, there's documented use of sacred plants and entheogens in religious liturgies and sacraments. So
So I'm just gonna say one more thing to my brother there. I guess you don't know this. The Daime
No.
is a Gnostic, primitive Christian, syncretic
Yes, I know.
religion. You know that.
Yes, I do. Yes, I do.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure
Thank
that
you.
you
Yeah, I'm
knew
sorry.
that-
No, thank you.
there are people doing exactly
know. I know.
what you're saying.
Right.
That's
No, exactly. Right there. Exactly. Thank you. Thank you for making that more explicit.
That's
Yes.
all.
Yeah. Thanks. Exactly. Yeah. It's already happening.
You're very welcome anytime, anytime to come where we are.
Well,
Consider the heart and the invitation wide open. Okay.
thank you. I'll be in Oregon a lot, I think, in the next year or two. So thank you.
Yeah, won't we all?
Yeah.
John, can you help us hear from the two folks we haven't heard yet from?
Yeah, thank you, Joe. I was just about to call on Nyanga. Thank you for being with us. One of the things that I was really interested in learning more about your community and how how these issues affect your community is around the fact that your organization identifies itself as an interfaith, ecumenical, kind of non sectarian kind of spiritual community that doesn't necessarily find like this is my understanding, and I'm very new to it, so maybe you can correct me and fill in some gaps. But how sacred practice need not necessarily be, what I think a lot of people traditionally identify as, religious, but it can be kind of like that. Not being religious doesn't mean you don't have a sense for the sacred and that you don't work within sacred realms. And so I just kind of like to hear, I guess, with your community in particular that uses, it's my understanding, psilocybin, kind of how that, how kind of your organization or your community works with these plants or these fungi, and how that could, find expression in Oregon.
Absolutely. Good evening, everyone. Give thanks for this opportunity to share, be in community. Thank you for creating this platform. Yeah, we're a spiritual family, and our utilization of fungi, plant medicines is just like the cherry on top of what we do. For us, it's restoring our sense of like connection to the spirit beings that we are, connecting to nature, to use that as a learning tool on how to better navigate this earth plane, and also connect to the Most High, our higher power. And so we do that through our triune of self-discipline, self-study, and self-love. And from there, we navigate with love. We approach everything with love. And we use psilocybin as our way of spiritual exploration. And from there, we do a lot of like educating, like our community, folks that look like me, so that, fungi plant medicines don't have that like stigmatism to it. And our purpose is like to create access to these medicines. And so I just seen a survey today around 4,000 people that showed interest in the Oregon psilocybin measure 109 facilitator, manufacturer, and all that. Out of the 4,000 people who took the survey, only like 19 African American Black folks said that they had any interest in what was going on. And so for me, there's like a big need for our community to be able to have the space and the safety to do what we do. Like, it's a part of our lifestyle. We don't take it as like something that's gonna like help us get over our mental situation at the time or get over some hump. It's something that actually like, it's like an extra boost to like what we already do, to our lifestyles, how we live, how we operate as a family, how we navigate community as a family, how we choose and how we show reciprocity on who comes into our family. And so, yeah, that's something big for us, is just being able to like educate and provide spaces like this just like you are providing, so that yeah, more folks that look like me could have that that medicine be delivered to them in a way that doesn't seem so like clinical or medical, because this medicine has been on earth since it's the first. You know, you got water, then you got fungi, then you got plants. And so yeah, we feel like it's very important for us to be able to just be the light, not intentionally, but just, you know, just the way we live, and yeah, introduce this medicine to people who are interested. To all, you could be interested, you can't be interested. We just want to introduce it to you, educate about it, break down stigmas, create access, and then the choice is yours. We believe choice equals freedom. And so we're all about providing people with enough education to make an informed choice on how they want to proceed and, you know, tap into their own version of spirituality.
Thank you, Naga. Wow. Yeah, I was also deeply troubled by the low response from African American community, just how underrepresented they are already forecasted to be within Measure 109, and how that's deeply troubling, particularly where a state like Oregon has set a goal of ending health inequity by 2050. And I don't think they can end health inequity if this doesn't draw in marginalized communities, just period. And I think one of the main barriers to, I mean, there's multiple barriers and to that, but one of those, of course, is finances. And one of the things about the proposal that I think is really critical to increasing equity within Measure 109 is that under what I think is typically understood as the therapeutic model, you have this really expensive service center that probably costs at least $250,000, maybe $500,000 or more to open on the low end. On the cheap end, you're talking that kind of resource investment. And then there's a facilitator who's trained and licensed, and so there's this very top down, and the facilitator, you know, or the service center offers, you know, the psilocybin to a client, and it just feels like this really, at the end of the day, big money is kind of backing it. And the idea of the proposal is that it really creates a more community container where spiritual and religious communities are able to provide their own sacrament and kind of handle it in ways that are appropriate according to their values and beliefs. And it also creates just a low cost way for communities to kind of work with these medicines. I've actually heard of my friend Lakshmi over at awaken.net has offered that within her web platform, they are willing to do crowdfunded projects within Measure 109. So I think of that being kind of a tremendous opportunity for communities to come together and just really fund and create and you know, do that. So I think having a crowdfund psilocybin center would be kind of a, you know, particularly if it's a community model, is just really would I think draw a lot more people into the program than is otherwise forecasted to be kind of included in it. So yeah, that's really critical. I want to turn now to Nicole Howell. I have to apologize to Nicole. I think I may have accidentally sent her the wrong link.
It's all good. I'm here.
Scrambling.
Hey, everybody.
Yeah, so Nicole is a lawyer with Clark Howell and a partner there, and has worked, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Nicole, but you're one of the co-founders of the Psychedelic Bar Association.
That's
and
right.
You also sit on the board of directors for North Star, that does the North Star Ethics Pledge that many of you may be familiar with.
That's right.
Yeah, so thank you for being here, Nicole. I'm curious to hear your take as a lawyer who works in this space of kind of the challenges that entheogenic communities have in terms of operating kind of above ground, like what kind of process. If Oregon does nothing here to draw special protections for religious practice in an affordable and equitable way, and the only feasible alternative for practitioners who use psilocybin religiously is to do it underground. Kind of what are the barriers outside of Measure 109 for a practitioner to come above ground, I guess is the question I'd like to.
Sure. And I want to answer that question. First, I also want to say, just as a general concept, kind of and John invited me to be here as a lawyer. I appreciate being here with all of these spiritual practitioners. It's lovely just to be in your community. As John mentioned, work with a group of lawyers that have started an organization to help lawyering be more psychedelic. And specifically what I mean by that in a word is to start within, which is what the North Star Pledge asks us to do and what we ask and invite lawyers to do as they seek to represent clients and businesses and churches in this space. And what we really mean by that is to see what is it that inspires us to be here. And if it happens to be an experience with psychedelic sacraments or practice, well, that perspective shift has tremendous ramifications for how we bring these things to market, and we don't allow ourselves to be lulled into we're just neutral actors as lawyers, and that we should do and can and must do whatever our clients who hire us and pay us money tell us to do, but that we actually have an ethical obligation to make sure that those regulatory frameworks and those business models are actually embodying the wisdom that interacting with psychedelics brings us, which is ultimately our unity with one another. So that's sort of my perspective as a lawyer and as a human being who practices law. That's really how I have come to identify myself, especially working in this space, but in general. And so there are so many things about John's proposal that are important, and I want to just kind of highlight a couple of them. One, John is the ultimate example of what we are trying to create as a psychedelic lawyer, seeing the truth of his experience and how that needs to show up in the law. And we have this brand new regulatory framework that some very smart people put together and the voters in Oregon decided to support, but it's not going to be perfect, right? And so seeing John's courage and really embodying his truth and his experience to say, no, this is something that needs to be recognized in the law, I think in and of itself is something that really needs to be recognized and applauded and encouraged in every one of these decriminalization measures or legalization measures, to borrow a phrase, if you see something missing, say something, right? Like we really need everyone to sort of step up and say, okay, this looks good, but it could look better. And here's the truth that we want it to embody. And in particular, I want to point out a couple things that I think the measure does that will have ramifications, like reverberations, both in Oregon and beyond, which is, first of all, just the idea that entheogenic, and what does that mean? A lot of people probably don't know what that means. They'll figure out what it means as they evaluate, this law that Oregon is putting into place. And, I've been thinking, as you all have been speaking, if this were to pass, right, and now we have this entheogenic facilitator system that sits alongside the regular adult facilitated practice, because of what we all know, right, when individuals participate in ceremony and have this experience with psilocybin, it has an entheogenic effect. Wouldn't it be cool to see sort of like the marketplace support more and more of the entheogenic facilitators and fewer of the non-entheogenic practitioners? I think it would be very interesting to see if these options were presented, kind of which direction we go on mass. I think would be pretty interesting. The lower cost of it, kind of overall and sort of democratizing the process, I think is of course a really key component. I could go on for the whole rest of the time about how we need to have public benefit or steward capitalist type business models. That's not the time. I won't go into all that. But the underpinnings of what John's regulations propose really help to support those kinds of ideas. And then finally, this requirement of a reciprocal exchange